Another thing that you guys have asked a whole lot about, and I've sort of tabled it, I think I've spoken on a few of these to some degree on the Late Kick Extra podcast, which we release every Wednesday. It's gotten really good traffic. But I haven't really done a whole segment on hot seat talk. I normally don't focus on this a lot, and I certainly don't ever call for someone to be fired. I just don't like doing it. A lot of other people do. So I let them do it, and it's going to be what it is anyway. So we mainly react in this arena. We don't really pontificate a whole lot. But I will just give you some thoughts on 5 coaches here right quick that I think probably most preseason publications are going to put on some form of quote-unquote hot seat. Now, what I like to do is I just like to tell you how secure I think they are in their standing, 1 to 10. 10 being you're in huge trouble, and 1 being you just got here 5 minutes ago, or you just won a national championship. So I wanted to start with Tom Herman, as I mentioned a few minutes ago in another segment. I'd put him in a 7 right now, maybe even below a 7. I don't view this guy as being on a hot seat. I don't view this guy's job as being in jeopardy this year. I think there's a lot of pressure on him, as there always is any time of year. It's almost a waste of time to even say that. But there is probably a slightly heightened sense of pressure on Tom Herman. But I'll tell you what greatly alleviated my concern about whether this could be a make or break year for him is when the staff at Horns 24/7 a few weeks back, maybe like a month ago, they had Chris Del Conte, the athletic director at Texas. They had him in a live fan Q&A. I, to be honest with you, had not listened to Chris Del Conte talk a whole lot about this matter before then. And some athletic directors are very on the periphery. They don't know the inner workings day-to-day of the football program. Del Conte's not one of those guys. Chris Del Conte is razor sharp focused in on everything Texas football. That guy knew offensive line draft stats from Texas versus TCU and other programs for the last decade. Like, he was dialed in. Here's what made me think Tom Herman's fine. Chris Del Conte started talking about that Sugar Bowl a couple of years ago. The way that a lot of fans I've heard talk about that Sugar Bowl frame it as is, all right, year 2, we went to the Sugar Bowl, we beat Georgia. The natural next step is college football playoff. And then when they came back to earth, perceptionally, this season, and it looked like they backtracked and they slid backwards and they fell down the ladder a couple of rungs, everyone started talking about how the program had peaked and now we regressed, and if he doesn't get it done this year, yada, yada, yada. Well, Chris Del Conte had the proper, to me, view on that whole matter. He said, there is a process to building a program, and in a lot of ways, we had to rewire this program when Tom Herman got here. And in year 1, there was progress. And in year 2, he didn't say it just like this, but here's how he framed it. You've heard me say before, I believe in describing programs as being a caliber, a win caliber. Sometimes you're an 8-win caliber program that wins 10 games just because crazy things happen and a lot of other teams fall, or maybe you play teams when they're banged up, or just you get really lucky in the turnover battle. And for whatever reason, you put up a 10 or 11 win season and you're really only an 8 or 9 win caliber team. That's kind of what Texas did in that Sugar Bowl year. That's how Chris Del Conte looked at it. And so what he said in that interview that made me notice is he said, it probably gave people a false impression of how far along we were. We were not that far along to the degree that it would normally take to make a New Year's Six game. When I heard him say that, A, I knew that meant he got it, and B, I knew that meant there's no pressure relative to hot seat or losing your job on Tom Herman this year. So I'm putting him at a 7. New coordinators both sides of the ball this year. You didn't have spring. He'll have every excuse if he needs it in his back pocket to buy himself one more year, even if disaster strikes. Now, Clay Helton, can't say that about him. We just touched on him a little while ago. This one's at a 10. I've never seen a more widely held consensus, again, amongst a fan base and amongst a group of supporters of a program than I have with Southern Cal. USC folks towards Clay Helton, there is such a widely held consensus that not only is this his last year, but last year should have been his final season, that it feels, in fact, this feels more unanimous than what LSU was when they held on to Miles 1 year too long. You remember how that worked out with Les Miles. They retained him at the very last moment, and then he only holds on a few weeks into the following season, and they axe him. Listen, LSU fans were still far more split on Miles at that point than Southern Cal fans are right now. There's a much more widely held consensus about what the fate of Clay Helton should be. Now, We'll see what impact that has on the athletic director there and the president and the decision they make, but I don't know how you go any lower than a 10 on the job security rating right now, 10 being a negative in this connotation on Clay Helton. Now, how about Will Muschamp? This is South Carolina, and this is Will Muschamp, and this is a lot of moving parts. A lot of moving parts for Will Muschamp right now. He needs, to me, two big things to click for him. And he's going to have to hit the ground running with both of them because you have no time to break anything in. He needs Mike Bobo to be a home run or a grand slam hire as his offensive coordinator. Now, for the record, you talk to people in the South. I talked to one person really dialed into that situation a couple of weeks ago, and everybody inside football in the SEC thinks Will Muschamp made one of the best offseason hires of any coaching staff. In getting Mike Bobo as his offensive coordinator, Bobo was in demand. He could have a number of high-profile jobs, and he went to South Carolina. He chose to go to South Carolina. They got Ryan Helinski back. That is Will Muschamp's hand-picked quarterback. They got him back again this year. So you hope that they're able to click offensively early on. There's been no consistency. There's been no identity. They haven't even had healthy players on the field to try and forge an identity, and it's been very up and down, a mixed bag to say the least. And that's my second thing that has to click for them. They also made probably a far less noteworthy hire in terms of national headlines, but a hire that I thought was pivotal for them. They went into Oxford. They went over to Ole Miss, and they got Paul Jackson as their new strength and conditioning guy. He had been in Oxford for quite a while, if I remember correctly. And so, listen, I would be lying to you if I said I knew definitively this guy was the right man for the job. He better be the right man for the job. South Carolina's biggest problem hasn't been play calling. It hasn't been design. It hasn't been anything like that. They haven't had players on the field. They haven't had enough players on the field. And it's not because they haven't recruited them. They've recruited well enough. They can't keep guys healthy. So they got to have guys healthy. Those are the two things that have to click for him to have a shot this year. Now, having said all this about every one of these guys, and Will Muschamp's no different, you got to take into context. Football revenues are going to be significantly down this year. If we have a season, it'll look way different. So football revenues are going to be down. So any name, including Will Muschamp, that I reference here, you got to take that into context. It could very well be that making a move on these guys is off limits. Internally, athletic directors just decide we're going to have to hold our nose no matter what happens this year. We are not making a move. That would be a disaster in PR and perception, and financially we can't afford it anyway, so that could be the case. Having said that, right now I'd put Muschamp at about an 8.5, because if this was a normal season, it was a general consensus from people around that program, you had your make or break year. Last year they thought it was, and I never thought it was. This year would be that under normal circumstances. Here's the weird one. The weird one, let's go out to UCLA. Chip Kelly is at UCLA. He is 3 years into a 5-year deal. I want to say he's got like a $9 million buyout. It just is. It's frozen. It doesn't really de-escalate as the years go on. I don't think, if I remember his contract correctly. He is 7-17 right now. It is a lifeless program. It is such a weird. The reason I say it's a weird feel is because if this were at Tennessee, for example, I would know. If this were at Florida, I would know. If this were at Michigan or Ohio State, I would know definitively this guy's out of here. He probably already would be gone. But he's not. He's at UCLA, and the reason it's weird is because I don't know how angry people are there. I don't know how collective the angst is there. I don't know how much people care about it. I really don't. It's no knock on, yeah, it is a knock on UCLA, to be honest with you. I don't know how much people care about it. I know how much people care at Southern Cal. I don't know how much people care about Chip Kelly and what he has or hasn't done at UCLA right now. And the other thing is, I wonder if too much apathy has snuck in to where, people, hey, all things considered, I'd love UCLA to be winning, but right now we're not, so just call me when we're winning again. Well, that's not how you apply enough pressure to make a move. And so I put it as 7 on a 1 to 10 scale right now of hot seat, job security, whatever. But it's so antithetical. And you know how very rarely I use that word. It's so antithetical to what he had at Oregon. At Oregon, every game was a sellout. They had an environment to sell. They had a unique brand to sell. They had talent. And at UCLA, he has got a shell of the roster he had at Oregon. The atmosphere, not even comparable. The brand, not even comparable. It just feels so dead in the water. It's like if you took a sailboat and you put it out in the middle of the ocean, but then you took the sail away. What's a sailboat without a sail? It's useless. It's just kind of at the mercy of the waves, and kind of same way I feel about UCLA right now. And also, when Chip Kelly came to Oregon, what he was doing was new. What he was doing, I mean, to that moment, no one had really seen that version of offense. He brought a new style of offense. Nothing he's doing is new. Even if he had the talent right now, to be honest with you, I question what the effectiveness would be. And that's what a lot of football people were saying when UCLA made this move. Like, what other tricks does Chip Kelly have in the bag? Everyone respects his acumen. Everyone respects his play calling and play designing ability, and everyone respects that. It's just that they felt like, whereas a decade ago, I mean, he completely dive bombed the entire sport. They didn't feel like that was going to be the case this time around. So add that to the fact that his roster is inferior to what he had at Oregon, and his situation right now is inferior to what he had at Oregon. I don't know how hot his seat is. 2 more years on the deal. We'll see. Now, Jim Harbaugh, I laugh at this. I know it gets you clicks, and I know it gets you magazine purchases. Jim Harbaugh's not on a hot seat. Whoever tells you that's lying. Jim Harbaugh's not on a hot seat. I laugh at the notion. Changes have to be given time to take root. I'm not talking about them hiring him. I'm talking about him, Jim Harbaugh, hiring Josh Gaddis. We spoke about this at length last show. If you want to go listen to that, look it up. You can watch the whole show, or you can watch just the Josh Gaddis feature. You got to give it a little bit of time to take root. This dude's done fine there. They've been a good program. They have not been a great program. You don't fire coaches for being good. You just don't. I know in fantasy world and Xbox world you do. This is the real world. And also this is Michigan, where they, for better or for worse, expect a certain amount of decorum, shall I say, in the way they handle these matters. They're not firing him. If he continues to turn in the results that he's turning in right now, they're not firing him. You are holding him to an insanely high standard, and as I've told you, I don't mind that. I don't mind it at all, because there's maximum fan investment from an emotional standpoint. There's maximum financial investment into him from a contractual standpoint. None of that bothers me. I understand all that. But none of it changes reality. Reality is, Colin's showing you footage from a press conference right now. I was in that room when that happened, although I didn't shoot this footage. That was at the Verbo, that's the day I learned what Verbo was, Citrus Bowl against Alabama. They just wrapped up a season where they played a New Year's Day game against Alabama. You really think those results, if he continues just on that trajectory, are going to get him fired? I don't. I know what the lead caption here is. They're 0-for against Ohio State. They're 0-for as Big Ten champions in his tenure there. I know what that is. I get that headline, but bottom line is, you got a historically great program that happens to be your arch rival there. If you fire Harbaugh, you got to have someone better already in your back pocket. If you have that, be my guest. I would put his hot seat at like a 4 right now. I don't think that there's any kind of danger for him unless there's some kind of scandal that extends well beyond football. Or, and this is not out of the realm of possibility, but this is different, if there's a mutual decision to part ways, if he wants to go to the NFL or do something else, that doesn't belong on this list. Some other names I had in the email inbox that I didn't even give mention to. Gus Malzahn, no hot seat. Frost at Nebraska, nope. I don't think there's a hot seat there either. Manny Diaz at Miami, I don't even think he's unpacked his bags yet. So no, I don't think he's on a hot seat either.